Say my name. I am awake. I am the danger. I am the one who knocks.
Welcome to the next episode, Breaking into Breaking Bad with Clifford and Caleb Humphrey. Today we're discussing Season 2, Episode 10, Over. Cabes, give us a brief synopsis of what happens in this episode.
Yeah. So this was a fun episode. The main theme of this episode, it was really Walt coping with his new reality, right? And so you see Jesse kind of go along with his with Jane and how that's kind of progressing. You see the relationship with Jane and her father, and Jesse not really knowing what that whole relationship is like. And then you also see a bit of a new side of Walt while he is at the party celebrating Walt's remission, and the whole part with the drinking and it was tough to watch. Let's just say that, if you remember with the Walt Jr. episode. And so, but like I said from the beginning, it's mostly about Walt's coping with his new reality and how he's handling it.
Yeah, well done, Caleb. This is kind of a hard episode to summarize because there's a lot of little things happening. But I think, like you said, the main point is that we're seeing Walt have to accept the new situation that he's in, and he's kind of reevaluating things. And then there's a bunch of little stuff happening all around. So the main thing is that. Okay, well, like we'd like to do, let's discuss the title of this episode. It's called Over.
You know, I'm gonna hold off on my
it's too hard for you because you know too much, right?
Exactly. And okay. Just to fast forward to the end of the season, I will be able to explain what it is entirely. So it's just hard for me to answer. Honestly, Cliff would be the best person to ask this because he hasn't watched this. He's only watched this show once, and so he might be able to answer this better.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I could think of was that his whole struggle with what's he going to do if he's going to die is over. Yeah. The whole purpose of cooking meth is now over. And there's this scene in the episode with Jesse when he says, we don't have to cook anymore. Like, I'm not going to die. I'm just going to keep teaching, going to retire like normal, and just going to live my normal life. So I don't need to do this extreme thing. That's all now over. So I think there might be other meanings to it, but if you're just watching the episode, just kind of straight through for the first time, that seems to be the straightforward understanding of what the title might allude to.
And I like to point out that conversation that he had with Jesse, in that it looked like a diner of some sort, they, like when Jesse heard, like when he heard the response from Walt that he's actually in remission, things are great, like he responded like a normal human friend would respond, and he was just so happy, and he wasn't even thinking about the business, he wasn't thinking about himself, he was just thinking about, wow, this is an amazing news, and it was just it was such a great thing. And then it pans to Walt's face, and he is just not happy, this is my life now. He was so
right. No, I think it's really telling. Okay, well, we'll get to it in just a minute, because I think it's an important part of the whole episode. Mm-hmm. So we'll start with the intro. It's a weird one. It's back to a very creepy one, and it's black and white except for this face burned off pink stuffed animal fished out of a swimming pool and put in an evidence bag. Immediately I'm thinking about Hank in El Paso, right? With Tortuga's head and all of that. I mean, it's just, and then hazmat suits, like, was there some sort of nuclear fallout or something? Like, what's going on? And then there's 2 body bags, and that makes me think of Crazy 8 and what's his name?
Emilio,
yeah, because they were dragging them around in tarps, and anyway, there's just, it's meant to confuse us, and it does a great job of doing that. And they have that weird effect on where everything's black and white except for that really hot pink stuffed animal, and it just pops. And I'm guessing that's going to be explained here soon, but it's just very creepy. So that's the intro. And then one of the first things it shows is Walt inspecting his hands.
right?
And his hands,
yep.
And they say you can like see the story of a person's life in their hands, right? I'm not talking about like palm readers or something like that, but just, people who have spent a lot of time doing manual labor, their hands show it. But it reminds us of what immediately happened in the previous episode at the very end, where Walt punches that, tissue dispenser thing, and he bloodies his hands. Now, I'm asking myself, why has Skylar not said anything about that? Because she's the kind of person who would be concerned and want to know what did you do to your hand, That doesn't come up for some reason. But we're reminded that he was really upset after he received his prognosis. So that's also confusing. And then we see him laying in bed, conflicted about whether or not he should call Jesse. He calls him and he hangs up, and should I call Jesse or not? And I think I don't know. What do you think? It seemed like he was feeling like, okay, I need to tell Jesse. Is he thinking Jesse's going to be upset because, now he doesn't have a reason to cook meth? Why is he conflicted about calling Jesse?
Well, I mean, the last they spoke, he was like, "Hey, Jesse, will you do right by me and give my share?" He didn't even say that. Jesse kind of just said, "Hey, I will give you, your family your cut."
Right.
Yeah, I mean that whole, oh man, that was a tough scene to watch.
I think you're right, though, to what you said earlier, that this scene shows a real depth of affection between them. Whereas before it was sort of like, hey, we have a partnership here, and we have, mutual leverage over each other. So I've got something on you, you've got something on me, and that keeps us honest. And we fulfill our obligations to each other. And, but here we see, Walt, in a way, like, didn't even have to reach out to Jesse, but he chose to. He chose to meet him in person and tell him the news. And then, like you, I was amazed at Jesse's true human caring for Walt as a human being, not as a person from whom he could extract really quality meth that he could sell and make money from. He says he was looking in the obituaries. He's like, I didn't hear from you. I was looking at the obituaries thinking I'd hear about you there, So
right.
Maybe he was caring about him, or maybe he was just looking to say, okay, he's dead now, I got to deliver the money to his family or something. But the look on his face and the tone in his voice when he's just ecstatically happy for Walt,
he showed a little
really
bit
telling.
of both. Like, he was very excited about the news, and also he was also saying, so, like, where do we go from here? And it almost looked like he was wanting to, go the next step. Like, all right, so you're alive, so let's cook some more. But at the same time, he was okay when Walt said, and I guess that's it. And he just said, okay. Like,
you mean when
didn't
Walt
try
says there's no need to keep cooking?
Yeah, we're done. I'm done at that point. So he didn't respond in a way to try to convince him otherwise. He just
Right.
accepted it.
Yeah, I mean, well done on Jesse's part, I think, as far as just being a friend and a decent human being. He doesn't treat Walt as a means, but he treats him as an end. We want to use sort of Kantian framework, but okay. So then what happens? So then Skylar's interested in throwing a big party for everyone, for Walt rather, to celebrate his remission. And maybe we should pause and talk about Beneke.
Good old Ted Beneke.
Yeah. So I was confused by the scene when he comes and he's like, "Hey, I'm locking up. Why are you still working? What are you still working? This late?" And she's got genuine interest in some accounting problem. She's like, "I can't leave till I figure this out. This is really bothering me." Now, she's probably not going to get paid more for figuring that out or something. Like she's showing genuine interest where she doesn't need to. And I'm asking myself, why? Doesn't she have enough to worry about? Why is she spending her stress worrying about this problem? Now, maybe she's just a person who, for whom accounting it's like a puzzle and you want to figure it out. It's like a riddle. And that makes probably for good accountants, right? But then when Ted sits down and asks how she's doing and she starts to cry, and then she reaches out and touches his hand, I'm trying to figure out Skylar, like, well, what's going on now? She says it's just the hormones. And my wife is very pregnant right now and she talks about hormones, and I get it's a real thing. But is that what's going on right now with Skylar? Is she truly desperate for affection from Ted? Or is there something else that she wants?
It's a little bit of all the above in a sense. So I'll break it down. So obviously you see the accounting problem, right? That's why she's there. But she's also, and let me actually back it up. You see them at breakfast that morning, and Skylar is like really all about, like, hey, you need to Walt, you need to like take it easy. Like we've seen a side of her that is showing more care for Walt than we haven't seen since the beginning of the show.
Interesting. Yeah.
Right. So, and I'm thinking, why is she like that all of a sudden? After several episodes ago, she didn't even want to be in the house. And I think it has to do with the attention and her new quote unquote life that she's getting from this job that she's a part of. So she almost found like she got like herself back, but she's also getting this kind of unknown idea of, like we know what happened with her and Ted, or so, there was something there that may or may not have happened in the past. And so she wants that affection because she's not getting it from Walt at all. And so like it's a little bit of all the above. She's there for the work. She's a good worker, so she's trying to figure out the accounting problem, but she also is wanting to look better. She's wanting to be there, and the whole thing with Ted Beneke is making her whole personality change in the back at the home.
So yeah, I mean that makes sense, but on one hand, on a human level, like that's how things seem to be most of the time. There's the answer is complicated, there's lots of causes for certain things, but I guess I would think with a show like this, there's got to be, they're trying to show, no, there's this one thing or this main thing, and that's going to lead to this other thing. So I'm trying to figure out what are the producers wanting us to key in on, and it's a little bit of a letdown to be like, well, no, she's just, it's just a bunch of different things kind of happening at once. Maybe that's true, and maybe that's believable, but part of me wants there to be another predominant cause. And we see.
You also notice that she hasn't really been intimate with Walt at all. She's being a partner that's there for Walt. Like even when she left and when Walt's on the bed and she's like, I'm happy that you're going to stay on the bed all day. I'm proud of you. And she kisses him. on the forehead. She doesn't. She's not being intimate with him at all. She's just like an empty vessel that's happy, not because of what's happening in the home front, but because what she's doing outside of the home.
Yeah, that's good. So there's the line that she says to Ted when he says, "Hey, are you happy?" Or no, because you got the good news, right? But what does she say to Ted? She says something like, "You'd think we'd be happy because of the good news, because everything's changed." But then what does she say? Like they haven't changed, or something like that.
Right. Like you would think this news would change the way you feel, but basically it's not. Everything's the same pretty much.
Yeah. So I don't get that, because when we're at home, she says, let's throw a party. Like this is great. Like everything's different now. And then when she's with Ted, she's like, yeah, no, it's all really bad, and I'm lonely. There seems to not be a connection there, right? There's some kind of.
Right.
So I don't know if she's just being dishonest, if she's really, interested in Ted, and she's trying to come across as just very vulnerable, and I've got this really troubling thing at home, and he's there to comfort her, or if she's being really genuine. I just can't tell. I don't know.
She almost has her own like Jekyll and Hyde scenario going on, it seems like.
Yeah. Well, then let's flash forward to the end of the episode, when yet again she's working late and she notices that Ted's there, and she purposely knocks over the little can of pens or pencils, and because she knows it'll make him come back and pick them up. And she says, "Oh, I can't believe I did that."
Mm-hmm.
And the episode ends, right? We don't know. We can, but that's what were we meant to see there? We were meant to see that she's manipulating the circumstances a little bit so that
Right.
he will pay more attention to her, and that she will get to be closer to him. And she's sort of flirting with the "I wonder what might happen if" scenario. Right. Okay, so we're not sure. We're just not really sure what's going on, but something's amiss. I don't think we're getting we're not getting the full story from Skylar. Something's going on. Okay, let's talk about the party. I'm kind of impressed they've got a lot of friends. Like, where do these people come from?
Right.
And why isn't Walt talking to any of them?
Right. I mean, this is the second party that they've had. The first one was the very first episode, and there's tons of people there.
Yeah.
And we haven't seen them at all throughout the rest of the episode. They just show up. So good. Yeah, good for them.
Right. Okay, so Walt is aloof. He gives a very awkward speech that makes everybody feel uncomfortable, especially Hank.
Well, that speech comes after him having to bite his tongue, while Skylar just gives all the praise and glory to Gretchen and Elliot. And so he's just having to and the camera shows him just looking down, biting his tongue, and
she gives a toast to Elliot and Gretchen.
Right? Oh yeah, it just eats away at him. You could tell,
because he knows that they didn't actually contribute anything to his recovery, and that he paid for it his own, for himself. Thank you very much through his own hard work and ingenuity. Right, he figured it out. Right. But he has to let them take the credit. And you're right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That begins a very slow burn in his soul, some kind of resentment. Because the last time, remember, he saw Gretchen, he told her to F off, right? I mean, like he's not happy with her, right? And so he doesn't like that he has to let them take credit for a thing that he's owed in a way. Mm-hmm. And I think we start to see that the effect of that that ember burning deep in his soul throughout the rest of the episode. So the next scene is the most awkward one, where he's sitting in the back of the party at the end of the pool with Walter Jr. and Hank. And they start drinking, and it's pretty clear Walt's already a little bit tipsy, right?
Right.
So they start drinking, and Walt pours Walter Jr. a drink, and we get the sense that it's maybe the first time he's ever had an alcoholic drink, and he's 16.
Yeah, they gave him the look like, oh, he good luck, man. And like Hank was on like was all about it too. Like, hey,
Yeah.
don't let your mom see, ha ha ha.
Right. No, he was being the quintessential uncle at that
Right.
at that point. And then it starts to get super awkward. And I don't remember exactly what Hank says, but he says something, and Walter Jr. looks at him. And Walt says, "Why are you looking at him like that?" What it made me think of was just throughout this show so far, we've seen this awkward thing where Walter Jr. starts to look at Hank as a father figure.
Correct.
And Hank, to his credit's like, hey, why did you call me to get you out of this mess? Remember when he was caught drinking? I guess it's not the first time he's had alcohol. Maybe the first time he's had tequila because they got beer. But
I was like, where, bro? Yeah.
Right. So, so Hank's like, your father ought to be the one that you call, right? And Hank, and Walt knows that, I need to do fatherly, type things with Walter Jr. So I'm going to teach him how to drive. We're going to go do something fun. I'm going to teach him how to drive. And so there's been a tension there. And it's because Walter Jr. is right at that age where he's sort of becoming a man. And who's he going to be looking to for sort of ushering him into manhood, as far as, you have what it takes. And, you should look to me for, this is what a man looks like. Right. So it's all kind of coming together. And that scene with Walter Jr. in the middle and Hank on one side and Walt on the other, it kind of culminates here. So Walt does the really awkward thing of pouring a drink for all three of them. And then, they toast and drink. And then Walt pours the second round. And at this point, Hank's like, okay, wait, that the first one, like that was kind of fun and games, but now you're doing a second one. Like now it's super awkward. And they do it. And then Walt wants to go a third round. And Hank is genuinely playing the fatherly role here. He's like, I'm gonna put myself in between this other person and this young, impressionable young guy who I care for, because I care for him and I'm not gonna let harm come to him. And so we see this conflict between Walt and Hank that ultimately leads to a face-to-face stare down that we're all afraid is going to turn to blows any minute now. And Walt is going to end up with a bloody nose in the pool. That's what you kind of expect is going to happen, because Hank is going to be able to overpower him.
And it looked like Hank had, at least you don't see this, but it looked like he had put out his hand for like, let's call it a day. That's what he said. And
yeah.
And it looked like it was going to be, that was it. But then Walt smacks his hand off of his shoulder, and it was about to go down.
Yeah, because in that moment, Hank had taken the bottle of tequila, which was technically Walt's property. But Hank did what any good friend would do and say, hey, you've had too much. You're going to hurt yourself. I'm going to take this bottle away from you. Right.
Right.
Right. Which brings to mind a really famous scene in Plato's Republic in the first book, when the characters are discussing what justice is. And one character says, well, it's paying your debts. It's giving everybody what you owe them. And Socrates brings up the problem. He says, well, what if your friend loans you a weapon and it's his weapon, but he loans it to you? And then he goes crazy and he asks for the weapon back. He's like, you wouldn't be a good friend if you gave him back his weapon when he's mad, when he's crazy, because he could hurt himself. And he says, justice requires you to take into consideration what is ultimately good for this person, not strictly what do I owe them in a strict sense. Because in that scene, Hank, strictly speaking, owed the bottle to Walt. It's his bottle. It's his tequila, right? In a court of law, the bottle belongs to Walt.
And he says that. My home, my bottle.
That's right. My bottle. Yeah. But what we see in that scene is like, well, that's really low, right? That reduces every friendship to fulfilling obligations on a strict, property rights level, instead of saying what is actually good for people, and what obligations do friends have that supersedes the rights that individuals have with regard to property. And ultimately, Hank is choosing the higher path, the more noble path, to say, I care more about you than I do your feelings in this moment right now. And I'm going to cause an awkward scene if that's what it takes, because I'm not going to let you hurt yourself or Walter Jr. by continuing to drink the tequila.
Right. And he obviously cares for Walt Jr. a lot.
Right.
And that's a pretty big part of the whole standing him down scenario.
Yeah.
And then when, Walt Jr. just barfs it all over the pool, that was more of a wake up call for
vindication
for everyone.
Yeah. So then in the next scene, Walt is trying to patch things up with Skylar. And he calls and he says, look, I'm not sure who that was yesterday, but it wasn't me at the party. And he's trying to patch things up with the family. And it made me, so when he said it's not, I don't know who that was, but it wasn't me, made me think of a point you've raised before, which was who showed up to the party that day? Not Walt, but Heisenberg. Or maybe we should say, at the moment when Skylar starts praising Gretchen and Elliot, Heisenberg shows up. Yeah. And now Walt is surprised by it. He can't control when Heisenberg shows up and when he doesn't.
That's a really good point. That's exactly the point when everything turned sideways, because Walt was okay with the party. He was okay with being there. And then right when they do the toast, it just goes downhill from there.
Right. So then Walt shows back up, though, and he starts getting on this home improvement craze, and starts with there's rot. Yeah, right. So first he wants to replace the water heater, and he's kind of flexing his cash flow right now. He's like, yeah, that won't be a problem for us to take, let's take the most expensive option, the tankless, option. So he installs all of that, which was pretty impressive. A guy like Walt knows how to do handyman stuff like that involving plumbing. Does a good job. And then he discovers there's rot in some of the flooring, and he starts replacing all of it. And he gets kind of crazy into it. And it made me realize, wow, like when Walt wants to, he can direct his brain power, his focus, his energy. He can really make solid tangible improvements to the life of the family. And that's different from what we've seen. What we've seen is Walt absent from the house, absent from the family, doing who knows what with random weird people like Jesse and Emilio and all of that, which is supposed to have some indirect benefit to the family. Like eventually that will turn into cash, which can then turn into paying someone to fix the water heater. It's all this indirect benefit. But what you see in this episode is, go ahead.
No, I was going to say if you flash back to really the first episode of season 1, you see Walt in this awful, just going through the movement stage with the step thing and everything. And he's not trying to fix things. He's not trying to be proactive. He's not trying to be the person that wants to take a hold of the situation to make things better. And the reason I think why he's tackling these projects is because of the person that he's become. A little bit of Heisenberg, a little bit of Walter, And honestly, he's also doesn't really know what to do with his life because
That's right.
one, he's bored because he's not trying to solve like life-threatening problems, and he also doesn't have the threat of dying tomorrow.
Yeah.
So
Right.
the Walt that we see now trying to fix these things and not missing a beat is completely different than the Walt that we saw before.
Right. Right. And the question is, does the life that lays before him now, is that one that's satisfying enough that he could do it the rest of his life? Especially in light of the ways that he's changed himself because of the choices he's made and the experiences he's had since this whole thing started. And so that's what makes that scene in the home improvement store so interesting. He's gone back a number of times to get materials and tools in order to fix the water heater and then the rot in the floor, and he goes all in, right? And he goes all in, and then he goes back one final trip to get paint, which is to say the last step, right? He's probably put
Right.
new wood that's replaced the flooring that was rotten, and now he's going to paint over it. So he's almost done, and he goes there to get 2 cans of paint, which actually is a lot of paint, but I probably so.
It is a lot of paint. Yeah.
And then he sees that guy who's got a shopping cart full of all of the materials that Walt knows you would need if you're going to cook meth. And he's putting it all together, and he starts to think. And what's he thinking in that moment when he sees all that stuff?
Well, he goes in right to like correcting the guy. No, you don't do this. You do this. You do that.
Yeah.
He came from this like level of I'm Heisenberg. You probably don't know this. I make the best stuff there is. You have no idea what you're doing. And so I think he liked that seniority going down on an amateur that he still is, but not to that level. And it feels good to kind of embark that wisdom, especially from him being a teacher.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Well, and he's probably thinking, well, now that Heisenberg is retired, there's going to be new people who step in and take over the territory.
Mm-hmm.
And he's thinking, and he's looking at this guy who's perhaps going to take his place. And he's thinking, no, I will not let you replace me.
Which is something that he did not think about when he was having the conversation with Jesse. He did not think about somebody taking his spot and being a new Heisenberg and being better.
Well, why should he care? Who cares? Let some new
Because Heisenberg
Tuco.
cares, like that's the biggest part.
Yeah, right. Walt doesn't care. Walt shouldn't care. Heisenberg cares. Why? Because Heisenberg is ego.
And you see it when he's in line to pay for the paint. And it kind of does like a couple different scenes where it gets closer and closer and closer to him. And then you see it, like he just goes like drops the paint, don't care, and just full on goes after this guy who looks like a Jesse wannabe.
Yeah. Right.
Who's completely untrustable if you don't know this person.
Probably gonna put like chili pepper in his meth or something.
Of course, yeah, chili P.
Signature move. So he confronts this guy. So yeah, there's the way they do the filming is really interesting, but I think the camera angle shows the camera from the shelf, and you see him putting the cans on the shelf, like from the shelf's perspective. But what's he doing? He's deliberately putting the paint down, and he goes out, and it's obviously he's making a choice in that moment. I'm abandoning the home improvement stuff. And he goes out, chases the guy down, confronts the much larger partner, of the other guys in the parking lot when the guy comes up to him and what does he say? Stay out of my territory.
Oh, so good. Love that line.
It's really good. Yeah, it's really good. But what I think you see in that line is Walt has made a choice. I am not going to put this down, even though I don't have to anymore. I'm just going to do it because I want to.
Well, also, he's probably thinking, look at everything I've done to get to this point was for this reason, but also I have earned this prestige, this empowerment. Like we are selling our meth for the most ever. Like he knows his seniority right now. He knows it's different. He's still very, very amateur, but he does not want to give that up. And I get it from someone that's so amateur that got in the business and then all of a sudden they're amazing.
Yeah.
It's like how do you handle that if you've never handled it before?
Yeah, right. Well, and okay, two other things. One, he's awake, right? He hasn't gone back to sleep. Okay. Yeah. And then secondly, related to that, remember what he tells Hank? He says, before my diagnosis, I was afraid all the time. And now I don't fear anything. And I think what's different is that now that he's got his good prognosis, the fear has not come back that kept him in his place.
Right.
There's nothing keeping in that place that was there before. And now he's awake, right? And let's take an example of somebody, a likely example that not nefarious like this situation, but like let's just say somebody kind of young and has a lot of youth. As this, you hear the story like frequently, who they get cancer and they and it's a bad diagnosis. They feel healthy, but they know they've only got 6 months to live. And what do? They say, you know what? I want to see the world. I'm going to travel. I'm going to do all these things while I can. And let's say they do that and they go and they have these amazing experiences and all this. And then they come back and they find out, oh, actually, no, it was a false test. You're not actually going to die. Well, are they just going to go back to living normal? They've been living on a different plane. You've been living so aware of your mortality that fear is gone. I just don't think you can easily go back.
Not right away. I have no idea, but I'm assuming something like that is there to stay at least for a while. Like you'd have to take care of, like not take care of yourself for a long time to really get back into the old swing of things.
Yeah. And maybe what it is too is that you have to have something to lose. Right. And if you've got nothing to lose, right? I mean, you're coming from a poker person perspective, right? If you've got nothing to lose, that's a dangerous person to play against. Am I right?
Correct. Because that they don't care and they're gonna go for it, and you have no idea what they're capable of.
Right. As opposed to somebody who's got a lot of chips that they're protective of. But if somebody's got no chips, man, they could be bluffing, but they could also have the receipts,
Yeah.
So somebody like that's a dangerous element, right? And they're
very dangerous.
Right. So somebody who's got a diagnosis like Walt had, right? He's like, okay, I got nothing to lose. I'm just gonna go all in, And so he's been playing like that for a long time. And now here's the question: does he still have nothing to lose?
Because this is what he's tackling right now, right? Like he just found out in the last episode that he's not cured, but pretty much. I mean, shrank by 80%. So he's in this idea of, how do I handle this no fear with my scenario now? Because I still want to be that person, but now I don't have to be that person. And it's that juggle of, what do I do now? And you see him at the end of the episode make that decision.
Yeah. Well, so we'll maybe wrap things up by pointing back to the title of the episode. Like I said, in a way, the whole show is over in that you could call the show up until this point the story of Walt's cancer diagnosis, and he had this wild thing that happened, and then he beat it, and credits roll, story's over. He's actually going to live. But wasn't it crazy what happened to him in those episodes? Like you could just say that's the end of it. If he decided truly to hang up Heisenberg, put it away,
Right.
and go back to the way it was. So in a way, there's something that's over at this point, and yet we know that the show goes on.
We also have to speak about. It's a small part, but we're introduced to Jane's dad.
Okay, why is that significant?
Well, you see Jane and Jesse obviously getting much closer. Jesse's showing him his old drawings. What was it? Kanga Man.
Backwards Man.
But he's changed it to Rewind Man. And I loved it that you actually saw the B
crossed out
at the bottom to make it to the R. I thought that was really clever. And obviously the Jane doing the apology girl, I thought was very clever. But obviously Jesse being hurt by Jane's reaction to her dad being there and pretending like he's just a tenant was
well, we're reminded of how kind of pathetic of a character he is from a potential father-in-law perspective. Not the kind of guy that the girl wants to say, "Hey dad, this is my new boyfriend, what do you think?"
Well, she says that. She's like, "What do you want me to say? Hey, here's my new junkie tenant. Oh, and by the way, we're sleeping together."
Well, that's the whole crux of it, right? Because in her mind, they're just sleeping together. That's what she says, at least. But we know that she was planning a day for them to go to El Paso or wherever to look at the museum. And so there's more to it than just that for her. But she says, yeah, dad, that's, she says to Jesse, put yourself in my perspective. You don't want to be the person that's saying, "Hey dad, this is the guy that I'm building a relationship with." And she tells us he's a hard ass. And we remember that she's been through or has been in 12-step recovery. So we know she's had a hard life that probably cost her relationship with her dad a lot. So there's probably been a lot of effort to rebuild that relationship. And therefore there's probably a lot of trust there right now that she's afraid of breaking. And Jesse is a potential piece of dynamite in that relationship that she doesn't want to get near.
Well, you also see her kind of being okay with breaking some of her own rules. They were both smoking in his apartment. I know he had the filter going on, but that was something that she was like, "You don't do it. You do outside." And so that's obviously a influence that Jesse is having over her that she wants to keep close-knit. But yeah, that was I think that kind of covers it, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Great. Well, we appreciate everyone listening on this episode. As always, like, share, follow, subscribe. We're on Patreon, we're on Apple, we're on YouTube. Love to always get more followers. I think this last episode we had our biggest showing yet. I think we had over 1,000 listeners. So appreciate everyone listening in and like to hear feedback and hope you guys enjoy it.
All right. We'll see y'all next time when we break into the next episode of Breaking Bad.